Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of TCG Talk, back today with another video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about the upcoming meta of Flesh and Blood, with news recent ascension to Living Legend, as well as Gravy Bones starting to really take his foothold into the meta. We kind of are going into a slight alteration of some of the decks that we could see being good. And I think there's some really interesting points from like each part of the triangle, so to speak, in the meta. And we'll talk about that and what decks I think are going to get better and potentially can make an impact. But if you're new to the channel, welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. Hopefully you enjoy your stay. If you're a long-standing supporter, thank you so much as always. Feel free to check out the Discord, the creator worksheet, all that good stuff below. So I'm going to bring this up. But before I do, like, with new hitting Living Legend, the biggest... like, if you don't add the context to every deck that's relevant in the meta, the heroes and the archetypes that benefit the most are anyone who can play good blues. Really, or anyone who needs to play good blues or wants to play good blues, and then also some of the aggressive decks can not have to worry about being disrupted as much, right? So heroes like Guardian in any Guardian class are going to see it, less of a barrier to entry, so to speak. Verdance gets a little bit better in my opinion. And then you also have some aggressive decks like Syndra and stuff. We'll talk about that here in a second. Sorry for the cough. It's been 3 weeks now. I've been sick. We still have this going on. Bronchitis is terrible. So all that to be said, we have Earth kind of taking a foothold in terms of representation, right? Like at the U.S. Nationals, Earth made up 15% of the meta combined, and Florian was one of the most represented decks, if not the most represented deck. And then at the Column Bologna, it was the second most represented deck. But what was very interesting about that event was the highest placing Earth deck was 28th place. There wasn't even an Earth deck in the top 24 of that event. We'll talk about that here in a second. But I think Earth will have a significant play in the meta. The key is how much will Gravy Bones affect that, and also Prism's gonna be a big player, because as you see Gravy Bones get more and more representation, it's going to hurt Earth. I think, especially as Gravy Bone list gets refined, and this is just my opinion, I think Gravy Bones could be a very big counter to Earth, especially Florian. I think it's gonna be a little bit difficult for them to combat Gravy Bones, especially once they figure out exactly how to play into that matchup. I know we just saw Majin Bay beat a very good Gravy Bones deck after piloting absolutely perfect, but I think that matchup's only going to get worse as time goes on. So, how much will Earth be affected by Gravy Bones' rise? I think Prism also is going to be even more of a key player in this matchup, because the more in this meta, because the more you see Prism, Prism just eats up Gravy Bones. I mean, it is not a fun matchup. So you have this weird triangle at the very, very top where Earth can get beaten by Gravy Bones, for lack of a better term. Obviously, it's not an auto loss, but it is unfavored for Earth. Gravy Bones gets beaten by Prism, and Prism, while has a good matchup in the Verdance for the most part, from my understanding, can have a little bit of trouble with Florian if Florian is tech for Prism. So you have this interesting, not full rock, paper, scissors triangle meta, but you do have these top meta decks kind of semi-countering each other, so to speak, as we go on. Then you have the aggressive decks that get even better with New being gone. Syndra, I think Syndra was, in my opinion, favored in the New, but it still was a difficult matchup. Syndra can kind of really hone in on some more stuff now. And then decks like Arachne slip through the cracks, and Marionette especially slip through the cracks, get a ton better with New being gone, just because Slippy doesn't have to worry about New using their hero ability against them. So both of those decks get better. And then how did these decks play into what we just talked about? I think both of these decks have a good Gravy matchup, but both of these decks can struggle in a Prism, especially Syndra can have some issues in a Prism if Prism just goes the Herald beatdown route and really wants to get value that way. But these decks in the Earth, it's a little bit 50-50, right? I think both of them are slightly unfavored in the Earth heroes, but they can win. So you have kind of that facet of the meta, so to speak. So now we go into all I had to say. I have a couple heroes here, and you saw two of them flash in front of you, of who gets better from all this and how does this work out? Because you're going to have to go into these big events, and you're going to have to ask yourself, okay, how much Earth representation do we think is going to be? Do we think Earth is still going to be the most represented class talent? You know what I mean? Or is the rise of Gravy going to kind of bring Earth down a little bit, right? Would we see Florian potentially being like the 4th or 5th most represented deck because people start to get off the hero because of the rise of Gravy? And then we have to say, okay, let's say Gravy is the most represented deck, or like top 2, top 3. How does that affect things, right? Do we pivot to something like a Prism or something like a Dorinthia, which I'll talk about here in a second? Does aggressive decks, do we want to go full aggressive? And then you start to get in this, not full rock, paper, scissors, but we do get into this semi-triangle, trapezoid, square meta. You know what I mean? So all that to say, some of the heroes that I think get better. One, I know it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse, and no, it's not Victor. I think Ira does get better from this, from New going away, not because of what her matchup was in a New, but because how the meta could potentially formulate from New leaving. If we see the rise in Gravy Bones from New leaving, trying to prey on some of these slower Earth decks, if we see Gravy Bones go up, if we see Earth go slightly down because of Gravy Bones, and then we see the rise a little bit of decks like Prism and decks like Guardian and Victor, I think Ira can have a good spot. She will still have a rough Earth matchup. The Syndra matchup is still, in my opinion, 50-50, maybe slightly unfavored. It depends on how you tech your sideboard, in my opinion. I think 3 Humbles and 3 Erase Face can really hurt a Syndra, but that's a different discussion for a different video. And then she has a good Guardian matchup, in my opinion, and she has a good Assassin matchup, especially non-new. Like, she has an even better Slippy and Mario matchup. So she could have this spot where she's like, okay, I'm going to kind of concede to Earth because I don't think they're going to be as represented at the top tables, similar to how we saw the calling Bologna. And I'm just going to try to prey a little bit on the Prisms and the Gravy Bones, who I think she's both very favored into. She's going to do her best to tech a little bit into the aggro matchups and then try to outvalue the Guardians. I think she could be in a really cool spot. Not like meta, top of the meta, but you could see Ira get into a top 8 and then see what happens from there. Victor's also kind of the biggest one. Victor and Bravo specifically. That's what everybody's talking about. Guardian gets a lot better from New leaving directly just because of the matchup itself. They have a good Prism matchup. The Graybow matchup could be a little rough, but I could see you just having a really aggressive style list with like Enlightened Strike, Zealous Beltings, all that good stuff, and really kind of prey on them in that way. They also have a good aggro matchup for the most part. And their Earth matchup, I think, I really don't know. It seems like it's 50-50 to me. But I think Guardian obviously is the other player that gets really a lot better. Warrior in general, I think, also does get a lot better. I think Asai, if Earth goes down and we see Guardian rise and we see more aggressive decks rise, I think Asai can really outvalue and start to use that dynamo control aspect and really just outvalue a lot of the meta. Prism, I think, probably is still a little bit rough. I've heard different things about that matchup, but it is what it is. But if you're really just looking to try to, outvalue Gravy, clear really easily while having good mid-range damage, be able to combat some of the more aggressive decks, so on and so forth, and also go tit for tat with Guardian, I think Asai could be a really good pick. Dorinthia is kind of like the silver bullet, in my opinion, for Gravy specifically. So if you're going into a meta where you're like, okay, Gravy's rising a lot, I think Earth is going to go down because Dorinthia doesn't like Florian. It's kind of similar to Ira. If we get into a meta where Earth representation goes slightly down, and then we see Gravy's representation go up, aggressive decks stay highly represented, and then we have decks, like Assassin and so to speak, I think Dorinthia could have a really cool place because she really can prey on Gravy's, with getting those Dawnblade counters, and then also have pretty good matchup in pretty much everything else. She just wants to avoid Earth. So it really all depends. Even though these are some of my suggestions as heroes that I think get better, I think it's very contingent on, how does representation of Earth change? Because in my opinion, if we have 2 or 3 more events like the Calling Bologna, I hope I'm saying that correctly. If I'm not, I know YouTube comments will correct me. Trust me. If we see Earth go down in terms of representation, and Gravy goes up, aggressive decks stay high. Maybe let's say the top 5 decks at any given event are, Syndra, Gravy Bones, Assassin in general, a mix of Marionette and Slippy, and then like Florian, right? and then we see like maybe a Guardian be in the top 6, top 7, and then Verdansk is like way lower. I think that type of meta is going to bode really well for like a Dorinthia and an Ira. However, if we see Florian still stay in the top 3 most represented decks regardless, and Verdansk is still doing well at the top tables, then it's going to be this weird. I think it's just going to go to a weird kind of triangle dichotomy of Prism preys on Gravy. Gravy can prey on the slower Earth decks. Earth decks can kind of have a decent matchup in them. Prism, and then you have these outlier decks, here and there. I think it all depends on how Earth's representation changes, because the most recent calling, the first real calling past US Nats, Earth did terrible. Florian was the second most represented deck, but there was the highest placing Florian was 28th place. And Verdansk, the highest placing Verdansk was like 35th place. Not very good at all. So it all depends on how things go. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. I personally think Earth will go down a little bit. Not significantly, not like not played or anything like that. Florian will still probably be a top 5, top 6 represented deck at all times. But I think Majin piloted that hero absolutely perfectly at US Nats to put himself in a position to win. And I don't think that individual event is indicative of what the meta is going to be over Nationals. I could be wrong, but I don't think it will be. I think Earth is going to slowly go down as Gravy slowly rises up, because Gravy lists are only going to get better week over week. All to say, gosh, my voice is already going. All to say, I would love to know your thoughts. I hate being sick, y'all, I swear. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you agree, disagree, please let me know. I'd love to get your input. This is just kind of my perception of the meta. I think this is a very macro level perception. I do think you can kind of pick a deck or pick a style that's going to prey into a certain part of the meta, and then not like fully gym luck try to avoid your bad matchup. Like, this isn't like Uziri and a Jeremiah level, like avoid your bad matchup. This is more like, I want to be favored or even into everything, and then have this one bad matchup where I have to play perfectly and get a little lucky to win type thing. But it'll be really interesting to see how it unfolds in national season, because we're not getting a whole lot of changes from here until the end of Nats, or no changes. And then mid-July, the Ira Armory deck comes out. We'll see if that changes anything for Ira in the meta specifically, or Ninja, maybe get some combo cards. But then we have the Guardian Mastery pack in August, and that's kind of like the next major meta shakeup. And we'll see how that affects Victor, Bravo, Valda, all that stuff. So love to get your thoughts. Love to kind of wrap your head around what you think. Definitely let me know down in the comments below. But yeah, if you like this type of content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If not me, it's completely fine. Go to another creator down below. Leave a like, comment, subscribe on their stuff. Let's get more people seeing this game. Let me know what else kind of videos you want to see. Love to get your input. And yeah, I'll see y'all next time on TCG Talk. Thank y'all so much.